I find your lack of faith disturbing. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Afternoons with the Ambassador. And with me, I have got my good friend, Padawan, or as he's better known, Mountains of Elysium. And today we are continuing our discussion of Star Wars lore, from a master to an apprentice. And today we are going to be covering the original trilogy, the great-granddaddy of them all. So, Mountains, my young Padawan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. And this was fun last week, and I look forward to this one too.
As do I. So, all right. Well, as before, Mountains, I open the floor to you in terms of the lore of the original trilogy. Where do you want to begin?
I suppose with the original trilogy, was there much of a difference with the Force then as it went to the prequel? Or how it was?
No. Go ahead.
Because it's weird. I look at for me, I'm a casual fan, and I looked at Star Wars as pure entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really dig deep into the lore. There was the Force. Gave you abilities, and that was much of it. But I said, you know what? I'll leave it to you. Where do you think we should go to first?
Well, no, because you're the one that is not particularly well versed in this, so I want to kind of guide you on your path of knowledge. As to your first question, the Force pretty much stayed pretty much the same way from transitioning from the prequels to the OT. There wasn't much difference. Force powers were pretty much established. You had mind tricks, you had Force telekinesis, you had Force choke, obviously, you had Force lightning, and that was pretty much the long and short of it. Everything in terms of the movie canon. Now, in terms of like EU canon, like Expanded Universe canon, there's a lot more there and everything. So, and just very quickly to the chat, Mr. CCDV, good afternoon, sir. Good to see you as always. Hope you're having a pleasant afternoon. So, but no, yeah, the Force powers pretty much stayed standard between the PT and the OT. So,
and I'm wondering, I know in later there seemed to be a difference between dark and light side. Was that established in the original? Because I don't remember there being much of a difference, only there was influence, either dark or influence from the light.
Say that one more time. I kind of lost track of you.
Yeah, I suppose, was there a difference? Like, from what I understand, dark side users have different abilities. Well, they're similar, but there's difference. Was that established in the original trilogy? Because I don't remember there being a difference between abilities.
There wasn't so much of a difference between abilities. There was a lot of overlap, essentially. Darksiders, or Sith, as they were known in the original trilogy, they pretty much had the same Force abilities and anything that Jedi did. The only big difference might have been application, and of course, obviously, the big difference was Force lightning. That was strictly a dark side ability. So, and to the chat, Sir Nerdlaw and the Truth 31, gentlemen, good afternoon. Good to see you both. So, in terms, as I told you last week, it pretty much came down to application of power. If you remember in Return of the Jedi and everything, Luke used Force choke on the Grammarian guards and everything when he got to Jabba's palace, but he didn't go to the extent that his father did. He only used it to incapacitate them. He didn't use it to kill them. Another thing, Jedi mind trick could be used for manipulative ends. Say, for instance, if Luke, this is a hypothetical. This is a pure hypothetical. if Luke was good enough at Jedi mind trick, which he was fairly good at, he could have essentially told all the grammarian guards and everybody else in the throne room to shoot Jabba, and then he could have just had them turn their guns on themselves, essentially. But a Jedi doesn't do that sort of thing, obviously. But more or less, it comes down to the alignment of the person and whether they are light side or dark side. And it also comes down to their alignment with the Force. And just very quickly to the chat. Good afternoon, Jeff B. I'm doing well. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. Hope you're having a good day as well. So.
And I was wondering, I know a Force Ghost became a thing. And I see a lot of the stuff, like I'm just picking up from watching all the movies, but originally there was just seemed to be Obi-Wan.
Yes.
Now, in the lore, was there more? Or
okay. If you want to get into the lore of Force Ghosts, we're going to have to go back to the Clone Wars animated series, which unfortunately you have not had the chance to see. So I'm going to kind of give you the short version of this. There is like a 3 or 4 episode arc where Yoda goes on a journey to learn how to retain his consciousness after death, or essentially become a Force apparition or a Force ghost. And to the chat, Pixelated, good afternoon, my friend. Good to see you. And Yoda learns this ability from Qui-Gon Jinn or anything, because Qui-Gon didn't quite get to that point or anything where he had mastered the ability where he could present himself as a Force apparition, but he could still retain his consciousness. What we learn in other canon and everything in the expanded universe, or what was known as the expanded universe, or legends, or whatever way you want to designate it as, Yoda was the first one to actually learn how to retain his consciousness after death. He passed that knowledge on to, or he told, if you remember at the end of Revenge of the Sith, when him and Obi-Wan are there on the Tantive 4, the ship that we see at the beginning of A New Hope. Everything, they're there in that conference room. And Yoda tells him essentially, an old friend has returned from the nether realm of the Force, is going to teach you how to do this ability. And what he's talking about is become a Force apparition, a Force ghost, essentially. Before that, we didn't, as far as my memory serves, and if anybody knows better than me in the chat, by all means, correct me here. But to the best of my knowledge, Force ghosts, in terms of light side practitioners, weren't all of that common. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So in many ways, it's a whole universe, so it's really difficult trying to kind of go, well, what about this? What about this?
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, the more I'm looking at Star Wars, the bigger and bigger it gets.
Well, yeah. Well, to quote Obi-Wan and everything, what he said to Luke, that's good. You've taken your first step into a larger world.
And, well, I suppose a question. Tatooine seems to turn up a lot. It's where Luke was placed, and it's cropped up in other. Is there a special significance to that world, or is it just happened to be a place where much of the events happen?
There, to the best of my knowledge, there isn't a explanation for why there's so much focus on Tatooine. For a lot of people and everything, if you look at like shows like The Mandalorian and so on, or even with the prequels, having Anakin and his mother um, are placed there just because I think, for one thing, Lucas wanted to retain that tie to the Skywalker family and Tatooine. Not to mention, you had the Lars family living there at the time. So I think more than anything, the reason you see Tatooine pop up so often is because it's iconic more than anything else. So.
Okay, I suppose rather than creating new venues for the story, it just let's go back to the old one that people know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Now, I suppose for going for, say, the training, I know there's been criticism of how Rey picked up in the more recent trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Luke seemed to pick up a lot of skills to himself. Now, how much kind of, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is how much unlocking of his natural ability did he have, and how much of that was training that Obi-Wan could have given him?
Well, now here's the thing. The thing you have to remember is Luke being a good pilot had nothing to do with his Force ability whatsoever. It just turned out that he was a very skilled and talented pilot. Something I don't know if you're aware of, they included these in the Blu-ray that they did of the original trilogy a few years ago. There's a series of deleted scenes where there's more time spent on Tatooine, where Luke and Biggs Darklighter. That's the one pilot or anything with the dark hair and the dark mustache that unfortunately gets killed at the end of episode 4. And there's another exchange and everything there on, and this is in the regular in the cut and everything that we have now, where Luke and Biggs are talking to Red Leader. And Red Leader asks Luke, "Do you really know how to handle these things?" And Biggs is like, I forget what he says. "You look at the best pilot in the Bush pilot in the Outer Rim territories." Luke has already spent a lot of his time being a pilot. He's used what they call a T-16 Skyhopper. And you see him kind of fiddling with a model of it there in the garage and everything in episode 4. And you actually see an engine nacelle in the one section of a wing and everything through that doorway. So Luke, being a skilled pilot, as I said, had nothing to do with his abilities in the Force. Did his abilities in the Force make him even a better pilot? Yeah, it did. In terms of his Force abilities, like using a lightsaber, like using any type of Force abilities, he didn't really know anything. So it wouldn't be until Empire Strikes Back where we see any type of elevation of abilities in terms of Luke. Anything where he goes to spend time with Yoda and train with him. So, and to the chat very quickly, MB Geek, good afternoon, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. So, Luke's abilities really wouldn't start to manifest, like I said, until Empire or in between episode 4 and episode 5, for the simple fact that he would start to puzzle things out himself a little bit at a time. That's why he knew that he could use the Force to pull the lightsaber to him when he's there in that cave on Hoth. And of course, you see him use Force pull again and everything in Return of the Jedi. See him use Force choke and so on and everything also in Return of the Jedi. And as the OT proceeds, or not as Luke progresses through the expanded universe, his powers grow exponentially. He becomes a master on the level of Yoda, or maybe even a little bit better. So,
okay, but it kind of makes sense that you're just not matrixed in with your abilities. You're just not plugged in.
No. What they did with Rey, it really, in a lot of ways, it broke canon, because to become adept in using the Force, you have to go through training. Even Anakin, as the chosen one, had to go through training. He just didn't pop out of his mother's womb or anything ready to use Force lightning and everything else under the sun. He had to go through training. Every Jedi and even every Sith had to go through training. What they did with Rey, with that whole thing about her being able to just download Force abilities from people, it's a Force ability that really doesn't have, at least to the best of my knowledge, have any basis in canon, whether that's in movies, animated shows, or any of the expanded universe / legends material that we have at our fingertips. So that was a big break from established canon.
And I know this is kind of going into the later one, but
That's
for me, it was entertaining, and I never noticed that. But you'd say something should have been put into the sequel to explain it, saying, well, this is an ability that, do you know what I'm saying? That there should have been some explanation rather than just hand waving it away. For someone like me, it didn't make a difference, but for someone like yourself,
yeah,
who knows the lore, it is a problem.
Well, and here's the thing: even if you're not well versed in lore, if you've watched the original films, you get a good baseline for what Force powers a Jedi or a Sith can have. And unfortunately, with the sequel trilogy, they don't just bend rules, they break them. Now, if we had seen in any type of expanded universe or legends material, Jedi or Sith or light side or dark side wielders teleporting solid matter through the Force, okay, that's fine. That's been established. It's a thing. However, we don't have that. The other problem is with the sequel trilogy, they borrowed everything and didn't really explain all that well certain abilities, in particular in The Rise of Skywalker. At the end there, when Ben and Rey are before Palpatine, he uses an ability that is known to a lot of Star Wars fans as Force Drain. This is present in some of the books and comics, but the first time we actually see it is in the game Knights of the Old Republic. It's actually an ability that a dark side wielder can obtain through training and through experience. Essentially, you suck the life from your opponent, or from anyone, really. But the way they used it here was not an accurate depiction of how that ability actually works, at least to my understanding, I would imagine to a lot of people's understanding. Force Drain can't necessarily rejuvenate you. It can heal you to an extent, but there are limits. They removed any of those limits in what we see Palpatine do in Rise of Skywalker.
Okay.
Not to mention the whole issue of Palpatine's spirit surviving being blown up not once but twice. And yeah, MB Geek, that is true. Everything Rise of Skywalker, certain elements of it were a ripoff of Dark Empire. Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. So, but anyway, does that explain that for you?
Yes, it does.
Okay. questions, I'm all ears.
Okay. Well, obviously, like I said, I've seen the movies, and to my shame, even though I think my brain has tried to block it, I have seen the holiday special. And I'm just wondering, kind of, let's go. I'm trying to think now. There's so much to go through. Which one would I go with? The Han Solo.
Okay, what are they?
Okay, is there, apart from being I suppose a lot of the original series, like if we can go into the expanded universe as well, just to flesh it out a bit, but
sure.
Well, I suppose, yeah. How much relation does the Han Solo of the original series bear to the Solo we saw in the movie Solo? That he was scoundrel.
Well, unfortunately, I never saw Solo, so I can't really say all that much. But from what I hear, it's not a bad depiction of a young Han Solo and everything. But again, I can't really speak to that all that much because I never watched it. And it's not because I was like boycotting it like a lot of people were. It's just I didn't have the time, and I simply have not had the time to sit down and watch it. I've heard some people say it's rather good. I've heard some people say it's not a bad depiction of a young Han Solo. So in terms of him, in terms of the canon that we do know about Han Solo, was he once a part of the Imperial military? Yes, he was. Did he decide to break with the Empire and become a smuggler? Yes, he did. And that movie pretty much gives us an idea of his formative years as a smuggler, as a rogue and everything, kind of as like a pirate. I mean, obviously he gets introduced to Lando Calrissian. We see that he has a girlfriend, that he grew up on Corellia, and so on. So,
yeah, no, it's just that was the first Star Wars movie my wife saw, and she said she really enjoyed it. And when people, when people say like, "Oh, they didn't like Solo," it may be true. Some people didn't like it, but that opened my wife to Star Wars.
yeah.
I know myself, I'm just a casual fan, but I'll be thankful to Solo for that.
Yeah.
I can convince her to watch some other sci-fi movies.
And you know what? And Elysium, here is the thing. Regardless of your entry point, if you can find something in Star Wars canon that you enjoy and it gets you to it opens up your mind to the whole universe, that's fine. I mean, I will say this: if people go and watch the sequel trilogy and they're like, "Hey, I want to go back and watch the prequels and the originals now. I want to see what else has happened," and they even say, "Hey, I want to go find all the EU material and everything, or all the Legends material now. I want to read it. I want to play it. I want to watch it, or whatever." All the better. You know, Star Wars is a big playground, and there's plenty of sand for everybody. So now, as I've said before, it's just a matter of your perspective and it's a matter of your entry point. For me, I have a hard time accepting the sequel trilogy as canon because there is so much that the sequel trilogy breaks in terms of established canon. And honestly, if you can't keep canon where it should be, and you can't keep canon at a place where it's not tampered with, at least not to the extent that it's tampered with like it was in the sequel trilogy, then you're going to have a hard time keeping your audience from getting confused. And I think for some people that is what a lot of people have difficulty with. Because, okay, let me clarify because I kind of went off on a trail there. My apologies. If you like the sequel trilogy, that's fine. You're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna find very many people in the Star Wars fandom who are gonna look at you and say you're nuts or you're crazy. Far from it. The problem is there are. But here's the thing I will say to a person that is coming into the Star Wars fandom through the sequel trilogy. If you like it, that's fine. I will still talk to you. We can agree to disagree. I can even say, hey, go watch the prequels, go watch the originals, and go watch the 2 anthology movies. And to the chat, Jeffrey Turner, aka Mega Jetty One. Good afternoon, sir. It has been a while since I've seen you in my chat. I am happy to have you here. And he says, tampering with canon is like that certain group burning books. No respect for history or knowledge. That I would say is a fairly accurate and everything explanation. Because the problem is, Elysium, for someone like myself and for a lot of people that I imagine are in the chat and that will watch us after the fact, who grew up on the prequels or even only grew up on the originals and then eventually got introduced to the prequels, we look at that and we say, this has a solid through line. This is the fall and redemption of Anakin Skywalker. This is the fall of the Republic and the ascension of the Empire and so on. And there are threads that are consistent all the way from episode 1 to episode 6. But unfortunately, what you have happen with the sequel trilogy is so many of those threads are cut. And they're cut in such a way that it becomes disconnected from what was set beforehand. And that's where a lot of people who have been lifelong fans like myself had an issue. Now, I will be the first to admit I gave my own personal beef about the sequel trilogy. I didn't care for it. But you know what? I've gotten away from a lot of people who all they want to do is bash on it and say, you know what? If there are people who are coming into the fandom who their entry point is the sequels, I'm going to say, you know what? Welcome to the Order. Welcome to the Jedi Order. Welcome to the fandom. Welcome to this community. Yeah. Jeffrey Turner, I would agree with that. Rewriting history is for time travel stories, not for real life. Yeah. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I must say,
as a casual, sorry, I'm back.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Elysium, please.
As a casual fan, I mean, I can enjoy, even I can say that the canon should have been respected because you can still create a good, engaging story that keeps the casual fan like myself engaged and happy and still does service to those who've stuck with it since, many of whom have stuck with it since the very first movie when they saw it in the cinema in 1977.
Exactly. You know, a gentleman that was in the chat last week, Poindexter Lounge, Enosh Fett, he and I, we kind of butt heads on the sequel trilogy. He loves it. And you know what I say to him? We are both still fans. I still respect you as a fellow fan. And if you want to like it, that is your perspective. That is your opinion. And you are entitled to it. Okay, I'll give you an example. And I think kind of to tie this back into the original trilogy lore. If you remember, at least from Empire Strikes Back. Okay, let's just go back to the very first movie. Yeah, MB Geek, I would agree with that. Yeah, you're an EU guy. I'm an EU guy. We both gave this a shot, and I would agree. In a lot of respects, it failed. But here's the thing: if you look at the character of Luke Skywalker, I'm just real quick, Mr. Hyde, greetings. Good afternoon. Good to see you, my friend. Glad you're here. So, anyway, if you look at the character as Luke Skywalker, and I'm going to ask you, as you would call yourself a normie, just a casual fan, what qualities would you say characterize him?
He cares for people, his friends, his family, people in not just people, but life in general.
Mhm.
He has he's honest.
Mhm.
He's he's not afraid of doing the right thing. He's a farm boy who went up to against the Empire,
Mhm.
who went into a major battle station to rescue someone he didn't know
Mhm.
in the hopes that it would do good.
Exactly.
And
Now,
as I said, that's what I know of Luke Skywalker.
I would say that is very accurate. To carry that forward, he was willing to go face Darth Vader, half trained, to save his friends. Fear did not dissuade him. Neither Yoda or Obi-Wan dissuaded him. He's like, they are my friends. I have got to help them. He walked. Now let's concede the point that at the time of Return of the Jedi, he's probably at the level of a Jedi Knight. Say maybe young Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones. That's where his powers are. So he walked into the palace or the stronghold of one of the most feared and menacing gangsters in the galaxy, Jabba the Hutt. And he walked in there alone. Had no weapons on him. His lightsaber was tucked away inside R2's head. He walked in there essentially unarmed, but he did it without fear. He tried to negotiate with Jabba, saying, "Look, I'm sure we can reach some sort of agreement that will avoid any nasty confrontation." Jabba rebutted it. Like, who is this young little punk and everything, sending his droids and this hologram and everything else? Now, and of course, he did not give up on redeeming his father.
Yep.
He was dogged. He was relentless. And even in the face of what we could consider the ultimate evil, the Emperor Palpatine, he did not quit. He did not give up. And even at that moment when he looked down at his father, whose hand he had just taken, and he looked at the circuitry at the end of that stump, and he looked at his own robotic hand and realized the error he had made. Now, granted, this was a stupid move because now we know from the prequels you can use a lightsaber to block force lightning. But that's beside the point. He's like, "You have failed, Palpatine. I will not turn. You're going to have to kill me." Palpatine tried his hardest, but Anakin, it's like, "This is my son. He has believed in me. He's tried to reach me." And in that moment, that's when Darth Vader died, and that's when Anakin Skywalker returned. Now, me saying all that, contrast that with the Luke Skywalker we meet in TLJ, and ask yourself this question: was that, yeah, and Big Geek, that's true. Vader didn't want to kill Luke. But the thing you have to remember is Anakin renounced his identity as Darth Vader in that moment. Darth Vader died. Anakin Skywalker returned. As I was saying, now Mountains, considering everything I just said, does the person that we meet in The Last Jedi sound like a natural progression of the character we met in Episode 4?
No, especially as the Empire seemed to have been gone.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot less stress and pressure on him. I don't think it didn't seem to make sense. And sometimes, honestly, when I looked at the sequels, I enjoyed them. But sometimes, for a lot of it, it was with the brain switched off.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just watching the spectacle rather than the story, because a lot of it did not make sense. And Luke seemed to be a different character in The Last Jedi. Now, he did seem to be more of himself in The Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, but the problem is you only got one scene with him.
Yes.
That's the problem. You only got one scene with him. That was it. That was as a Force ghost.
Yes.
So,
and maybe one or two more scenes might have made a difference there. Now, as I said, I'm looking at it as a casual fan, so it wasn't that big a deal for me. But for you and for those who the canon matters more, it should have been there for you. Or in fact, The Last Jedi shouldn't have done what it did to him.
Exactly. Now, there are some... Now, I will say this. If Johnson's intention was to do a deconstruction of Luke Skywalker, okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with deconstruction of characters. But the problem is, it just... Yeah, and Jeffrey Turner, I would agree. Jeffrey said and everything. I still say, despite the bad writing, Mark Hamill was good in those Disney movies. He did the best with the garbage. Yeah, and he did the best he could. And now to kind of finish, and then I'll let you follow up. I would have minded a deconstruction of Luke Skywalker, but I would have... I don't know if they're... I don't know. I'm doing my best with my fan fiction to fix Luke and everything, because to me, what we see in Rise of Skywalker, or not, well, Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi, as you said, that doesn't seem like a normal progression. Because here's the thing. If you remember from the original trilogy, to kind of get us back on that point, neither Yoda nor Obi-Wan ever gave up on their duty as Jedi. Did they realize that the Jedi Order had failed? Yeah, they did. Even Yoda says as much and everything in some of the books and everything in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. Yoda realizes he failed, the Jedi Order failed. But they didn't give up on their duty as Jedi. Jeffrey Turner, yeah. Yeah, I get what you're saying there, man. But anyway, Jedi do not quit. Jedi are dogged. Jedi are relentless. Jedi are hopeful. They might get knocked down, but they don't stay down for very long, if ever. That's the point. The Luke we meet in Rise of Skywalker, or The Last Jedi, had cut himself off from the Force because he made a momentary mistake. Yeah, you could say that mistake where he, for a moment, he considered killing his nephew, and then it's like, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay, just like that moment in the Return of the Jedi where he almost gave in to his anger and killed his father.
It didn't. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it didn't make sense because Luke was tempted by the dark side, didn't give in to it.
Yeah, but
same there.
But here's the thing. He had... MB Geek, I think I might know. But by all means, share and everything, because I'm a little rusty on my EU canon. So And Jeffrey Turner brings up an interesting point. I wonder if Yoda or Obi-Wan stayed on those planets for the whole 20 years, or if they did venture off to subtly help people. Jeffrey, to the best of my knowledge, we don't ever see Yoda or Obi-Wan off-world. I don't think Yoda ever left Dagobah after he arrived there or anything, because he simply did not have the means. Obi-Wan could have, but here's the thing. Him and Yoda would have been very high on the Empire's hit list. There would have been hollows or pucks out to practically every bounty hunter in the galaxy. Because if you think about it this way, two of the last Jedi existing in the galaxy, they're going to have a bounty on their head that could buy yourself a small moon or a planet and everything if you bring them into the Empire. So I sincerely doubt Obi-Wan or Yoda ever left Dagobah or Tatooine at any point and everything in the intervening years after Revenge of the Sith. So CCDV, that's not a bad guess, but I don't think it was Thrawn. I think I know who it is, maybe, but I'm not entirely sure. I think it is somebody from the first Thrawn trilogy. It might have been in Last Command. It could have very well been Jorah Sabath, possibly, but that's just a guess. It's been a while since I read them and everything. I'd have to go back and reread that one. So, anyway, Elysium, what else would you like me to cover for you or explain?
I suppose later on, just to, because I have, even me, complete normie, I have heard of Tron, and maybe to later to cover that, just to see, because I do hear it was a really good series, and he was a really great character in the EU.
Yes. Well, the Thrawn trilogy, the first Thrawn trilogy, which is The Heir to the Empire, Dark Side Rising, and The Last Command, was actually the kickoff in a lot of ways of the EU or anything. Because before that, we had the Marvel comic book line and everything. Yes. Yeah. Well, what Jeff is talking about is the fact that Terrence Stamp, who played General Zod in Superman 2, was actually Supreme Chancellor Valorum in The Phantom Menace. So I didn't know if you knew that or not. But yeah, Elysium, I would highly suggest if you can get your hands on a copy of the Thrawn trilogy, I would suggest very highly reading it. It is really a good place to pick up. It is a really a good place to pick up with the EU. It's a really good entry point, and I would imagine that you could probably even find it on Audible if you have access to Audible and everything, because oftentimes we don't always have time to read, but we always have time to listen. And more often than not, the people who do the audio versions of these Star Wars books, they're some of the best. They really are. So, to kind of give you a quick synopsis of the Thrawn trilogy, this takes place, if memory serves, and MB Geek, you can verify this for me and everything, or fact check me. The Thrawn trilogy takes place, I think, roughly 5 to 10 years after the original trilogy ends, and you have this Grand Admiral Thrawn and everything, who was a member of the Imperial military. He had been stationed out in, I think, near the unknown regions and everything around the time of the defeat of the Empire at the Battle of Endor. So. General Zod versus Emperor Palpatine. But that'd be an interesting fight, Jeff. But that's a discussion for another time. So, essentially, the Thrawn trilogy, like I said, takes place, I think, like 5 to 10 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, and like I said, Thrawn comes back. He's got a small military force. He's found some old ships or anything that the Empire had built and everything, or the Old Republic had built just before the Old Republic collapsed. He finds the finds a clone of a Jedi Master by the name of Joruus C'baoth, and that master essentially tries to manipulate Luke and everything to the dark side, and everything to be his apprentice, him and Leia both. And it's a really good story. I don't want to ruin it for you, but that's the basic gist of it. And that's also where we get introduced to Talon Card and Mara Jade. So,
yeah, that's something I would like to do once. To steep myself more in the lore. It mightn't be official canon, but it's still an interesting story.
Yeah, it is. It is a very entertaining story. It's everything. Like I said, it's a 3-book trilogy and everything. So, but it's if you like I said, even if it says Legends on the side, I suggest you sit down and read it, because it doesn't matter what the cover says. If there's a little banner that says Legends, the story inside it, that's what's important. So,
okay. I suppose, kind of getting back to the original trilogy. Let's see. Was the Empire actually defeated in Jedi? Because I know originally it just seemed like the rebels were celebrating on Endor. It was like a great victory, but a local one. And I know when they remastered it, it showed people all over the galaxy celebrating. So in lore, was there anything to say that the Empire was defeated that day, or it was just the beginning of the end, or what's in the lore to say what happened?
Essentially, the defeat of the Empire at Endor was kind of the beginning of the end for the Empire, because if you think about it, one of their Super Star Destroyers was destroyed. The second Death Star was destroyed. Both Vader and the Emperor were both killed. A big chunk of the Imperial fleet that was there at Endor was destroyed, but it wasn't the entire fleet, obviously, because everything. But essentially, that was a major turning point in the Galactic Civil War, as it's known within canon and everything. Because obviously, you've got the rebellion against the Empire, and then of course you've got the Empire, and it's essentially a civil war in a manner of speaking. So, but no, the Empire wasn't completely destroyed, but that was like their second major defeat. Because if you think about it, the big turning point was when the first Death Star was destroyed. That was when the whole galaxy realized that
if could defeat a larger enemy.
If a bunch of snub fighters could be lucky enough to destroy a battle station that size, that was a rallying cry for the rest of the galaxy. That was when the rest of the galaxy really started to organize with the rebellion. That's when the rebellion really started to gain steam and everything. So, but no, it would take many years after Return of the Jedi before the Empire would formally concede, and there would be a peace treaty of some sort between what would become known as the Imperial Remnant and the New Republic. So,
okay, because it was, I know from the first movie, I think that was the time that the Senate was actually disbanded. There was still an Imperial Senate, and then it went to the governors. So was it in essence, I know it's not in the movie, but is there anything in any of the official canon to say, was it governors took over, or how did the Empire hold itself together?
You mean after?
Yes, I know you said that the destruction of the second Death Star wasn't the actual end. It took a bit of time for the proper defeat of the Empire. But was there someone who took over from the Emperor, or was it a?
Okay, I follow you now. Essentially, there was a lot of infighting because there were a lot of generals and admirals and everybody else and their mother and everything that who was vying for Palpatine's throne and everything. There was Palpatine's own inner circle who tried to take up leadership of the Empire and what have you. And there was even not only where was the Imperial or the remnants of the Empire still fighting the New Republic or the the rebellion, but they were also fighting amongst themselves. So, and something that MB Geek brings up and everything. There is a book called the Truce of Bakura. That's another really good EU story and everything, or EU book and everything. I would recommend that you pick up at some point, and everything, because there was a point when the rebellion and the Empire did join forces briefly, and this was just a few days or so after the defeat of the Empire at Endor. There was this reptilian race that was on the outskirts of, I think, like the Outer Rim or whatever, and they tried to make a major move and everything, and they were a little much than either of the group could handle. So the rebels and the Empire had a brief peace agreement or a truce and everything to fight off this much more dangerous threat. Yeah, and MB Geek says it perfectly. In EU, they did not really defeat the Empire. They made a peace treaty, and that was almost 20 years later after Endor. So yeah, that's pretty much that's the consensus that a lot of fans and everything, a lot of members of the fandom accept as the official end of hostilities between the Imperial Remnant and the New Republic. So,
for me as a normie, that would kind of make sense because while the rebels defeated the Empire, they still looked pretty weak, and they didn't look like a force that could hold a galaxy together. So it does kind of make sense that, yeah, things wouldn't have just flipped over from one side to the other, just like that.
Yeah. And that's true. But for the sake of storytelling for the movies, that is a satisfying ending because you realize eventually everything, as I said, for the sake of the movies, you've got your closure point. The Empire has had another major crippling of defeat. The rebellion is celebrating a major, massive victory. Anakin has been redeemed. Even though he dies in the movie, he is redeemed. And that's the closure point for that particular story. And to the chat, an old friend who hasn't been here in a while, Positive Gander, good afternoon, my friend. Good to see you as always. And to Jen's Pender, good to see you as well. Hope you're both doing well.
Good to see you, Positive Gander.
Yeah, same here.
I suppose just as a quick thing, which of the endings, I know they, like I said, when they remastered the Return of the Jedi, do you prefer? I know originally it was just the group of rebels celebrating on Endor, and when they remastered it, it was galaxy-wide. Yeah. Honestly, personally, I prefer the original, where it was just the rebels on the day putting together a party going, oh my God, how do we get out of that one? They're just celebrating with what they have in the woods with the Ewoks.
Yeah.
And to me, it seemed like so natural, where the second one, interesting, but it's weird to say it seemed to have less of an impact for me.
Well, to answer your question, I'm kind of on the middle. Both endings are fine. I understood what Lucas was trying to do. He wanted to give the rebels victory a little more scale, a little more substance, rather than it just be them there on Endor and that's it. I didn't mind the different wipes to Naboo and to Coruscant and to Tatooine and to Bespin. Those didn't bother me. I didn't have a problem with that. The only change that I do not care for, and I've kind of let this go. The only change that he made that I did not care for was the appearance of the Force ghosts there on Endor. I have nothing personal against Hayden Christensen, but I think keeping the older gentleman, Sebastian Shaw, who played Anakin / Vader and everything, as the appearance of Anakin's Force ghost was better in my perspective. Because that's the person Luke saw when he took the helmet off. As
normie, I 100% agree with you there.
Like I said, at first I was like, George, quit changing things. I liked old Anakin. Old Anakin was fine. We didn't need to see Hayden again in Jedi robes. So, and MB Geek and everything, he brings up a line of dialogue. I think it's from one of the novels and everything. Yes, reluctantly, but yes. I've been authorized by the 8 remaining Moffs to open peace negotiations with the New Republic. Gilead Pilion to Leia Organa Solo. So, Gilead Pilion and everything was actually a character from the Thrawn trilogy, and he was a carryover into a lot of other EU stories and everything going forward. So,
actually, speaking of, we'll say Hayden Christensen and the older Vader, it kind of brings up a question
Sebastian.
to me. Yeah, was it Sebastian?
Jeff. Hey, Jeff, it wasn't Sebastian Stan. It was Sebastian Shaw. That was who played old Anakin in Return of the Jedi. So,
I was just wondering, because it seemed to me that during Return of the Jedi, that Vader was already turning back. Mm-hmm. He was. He didn't seem to be truly evil. He did seem to be wanting. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to say is, he wanted to change, but it's not like that. It was like a drug addict. He wanted to change, wanted to let it go, but it was almost as if he didn't have a will, but he was still there. And what I'm trying to get at is, they're saying Vader was killed or Anakin was killed, but how much of them are each other? Are they really separate people, or was it just that the influence overtook Anakin and he was unable to control himself? How much of Anakin was still in Vader?
Well, this is a conversation where there is some contention as to how much of the actions that are carried out are the Vader personality and how much of it is of Anakin. My way of thinking of it, and some people have said they agree with this or anything. Some people say they disagree. Again, this is kind of a tricky thing, because it's the way Vader talks and in Rebels, when we see him in Rebels or anything, the animated show, and we see him in other media and everything like comics or so on, and he refers to Anakin as "I killed Anakin Skywalker. He no longer exists."
Okay.
Let me flesh this out a little bit more for you, Alicia. In that conversation there on Endor, and on the Imperial installation between Luke and Vader, you hit on something very accurately. Vader's reaction to Luke when he says the name of Anakin Skywalker, if you notice, it was very hostile. Like he was almost I hate to use this word, but it's a relative. It's I think for this particular instance, it's an accurate word. He was triggered by it because Anakin Skywalker was antithetical to everything that Darth Vader represented. He was weak. He was pathetic in the mind of Vader, where Vader only respected strength and, well, cruelty to us to a certain degree. But the thing is, Luke saw in something no one else saw. There was still a spark of light. That was Anakin Skywalker. When Luke says to Vader, I know there's still good in you. The Emperor has not extinguished it fully. He was right. For all the years that Vader served Palpatine, that spark of Anakin Skywalker was still inside him. The good man, the friend, the husband, the soon-to-be father. All of that, all the good that Anakin was still lived inside Vader. Palpatine, for as much as he tried, wasn't able to extinguish that one spark of goodness that still existed inside of him. So, Anakin or Luke was the key to that spark turning into a blazing inferno that burned away the Vader persona. Anakin was still there, but he was dormant. He was buried. He wasn't in control anymore. The Vader persona who was in control. And I think for all those years. I would make the argument, and for those of you in the chat, you can disagree with this. This is just my opinion. The moment when the platform is lowered and Palpatine says, Lord Vader, can you hear me? And Palpatine tells him he killed Padme. That's when Anakin Skywalker was buried. That was the only person, aside from his unborn children, that Anakin cared about. That's the true moment when Darth Vader was born. Not when Anakin was kneeling there in Palpatine's office after the death of Mace Windu. Not after. Okay, you can make the argument that the birth of Vader was when he killed the children there in the Jedi Temple. But at least in my perspective, the moment Vader was born was when he realized that he, by his own hand, killed his wife. That was when Darth Vader truly took over control of the person and everything Anakin used to be and buried him. So, for Anakin, Padme was his entire world. Nothing else mattered. The Jedi Order didn't matter. As we talked about last week, if I had been Anakin and Obi-Wan and the Jedi Order told me, go spy on Palpatine, I would have been like, you ain't worth it. Go spy on your own damn self. This is the only person who's treated me with any modicum of respect or decency since I've been on this blasted planet. Y'all want me to go spy on him? To hell with you. No, I'm not going to spy on him. Send one of your little toadies and everything. Send one of your little Padawans to spy on him. Everything you want, if you want to spy on him, or if you're so powerful in the Force, why don't you read his thoughts? I would have told him to take a flying leap. But that's another topic for another time.
Like you're saying, it actually seems like the Jedi are just as much Vader's parent as Palpatine was. Because without both of them, that the Jedi and Palpatine are equally parents of Vader. It wasn't just Palpatine turning Anakin to the dark side. It was the Jedi behaving atrociously.
Yeah.
And pushing him into the dark. By refusing him light, they left him no option but to turn dark.
I would say that is a very astute observation, Elysium. Yeah, and Jeffrey Turner brings up an interesting point. So, and you take care, bud. Hope the rest of your shift goes well. So, we'll talk to you later, bud. Yeah. Have a good night.
Take care.
Jeffrey Turner brings up this point. I still say Padme might have survived, and Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Bail Organa faked her death so Vader and the Emperor wouldn't think to look for her. That's a possibility too. But unfortunately, we do know that Padme was dead. I didn't care for the fact that a lot of people agree with this. This is one part of the prequels we did not care for, that she simply gave up the will to live. I'm sorry, that for me just doesn't jive. You know,
I'd agree with you there. Even as I said, normie fan, I looked at that and went, that just doesn't make sense. She has 2 kids.
She has 2 children. So, yeah. Obviously it would have completely screwed up canon and everything if she had lived and she was just in hiding somewhere. And how do you bring her into the original trilogy? It's next to impossible. I mean, unless you do a lot of retconning, which you could. I mean, look at what the sequel trilogy did, but that would have completely screwed up a lot of established canon and everything if they had tried to introduce Padme into the original trilogy. So,
yes, yeah, it was. Yeah, there were a few problems with for me trying to link them together with the original trilogy, linking to the prequel, or sorry, rather linking the prequel to the original. Padme's death was one of those. It didn't make sense.
Yeah, and that's legitimate, right? But overall, it's one that can be overlooked. Everything, and if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, is it kind of a nonsensical line? Yeah, it is. But at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, how much of a difference would it have made? Okay, it might have made some difference, but ultimately, Lucas made the choices he made, and I'm not going to bash him for it. I'm not going to sit there and say George Lucas ruined my childhood. No, George Lucas didn't ruin my childhood. George Lucas made my childhood awesome. Not only that, he has given me a piece of media that I can look back on fondly and say, although it is a bittersweet memory for me, Return of the Jedi was the last movie I got to see with my dad before he died. It's the last movie we got to see as a family, me, my mom, and my dad, before my dad passed. And to the day I either stop breathing or the good Lord takes me, I will remember sitting in that dark theater between my mom and dad and watching Return of the Jedi. And I will remember 20 some odd years or so later being able to go back to the theater and watching the special editions of the original trilogy and say, I got to see Star Wars on the big screen. Not the way I remember it, but in a way that was respectful of what Lucas did before, but was a fully realized version of his vision. And I can say I got to see all 3 of the prequel films again in theater, in loving memory of my father, who introduced me to these films.
And those are special memories that even bad sequels can never take.
As much as The sequels tried? No. You know, I'll tell you something. The night we walked out of The Rise of Skywalker, me and the Mad Ambassador and our two friends. Actually, I left before the end of the movie, so I was waiting for them. I looked at Mad Ambassador and I said this. I am glad, even though I would wish he is still here, even though he would be in his 70s at this point. I am glad my father is not here to see these ghastly films. Now, to everybody else who loves them, you have my utmost respect. If you love the sequel trilogy, I will not berate or belittle you for it. And even to the people who worked on the films, to the actors and everyone else, and the hamstrung director, I will not berate you or belittle you because of your efforts. Do I necessarily agree with what you did? No. But you know what? You tried. You were you were crippled by a guy who some people consider Rian Johnson a genius. And you know what? In some ways he is. I've heard a lot of people say that Knives Out is a great film, and maybe someday, years down the road, I might watch Knives Out. But for right now, I can't. But I will not berate or belittle anyone that has busted their, has busted their ass to make these films. You don't like them? Fine. You love them? Fine. We're all fans here. We're all part of the Star Wars community. We're all part of this fan base. Whether you've been a part of it for 40 years or you've been a part of it for 5, we're all fans. And it's sorry, I don't mean to preach Elysium. My apologies. I'll say this and I'll
Not
let
at
you.
all.
I will say this. Every person has their right to critique. Every person has their right to their opinion and their voice, just as much as the people who saw them and just as much as the people who made them. Now, Daisy Ridley and John Boyega have come out and given their opinion on their experience of the sequel trilogy, and you know what? They're entitled to that too. If they did not enjoy their time, now that they are most likely not under any type of non-disclosure agreement, they can come out and say whatever they darn well please. I don't hate the actors and actresses that have worked on these movies. I don't even dislike the directors. Do I particularly care for what they did? No. But I will say this much. The people who worked on the sequel trilogy, they busted their ass to bring us something of merit. And I say that's a lot more, that's of much more benefit than sitting in front of a camera and ragging on it. You don't like it? Fine. You're allowed to say, hey, I don't like this. I think this breaks canon. I don't care for these characters. Criticism's valid. But don't hate on the people who create. To kind of put a biblical spin on this, whereas the old saying is, hate not the sinner, hate the sin. Hate not the creation. Hate not the creator. Hate the... Okay, let me put it this way. Dislike not the creator dislike the creation?
Yes.
So, anyways, Elysium. Questions about the original trilogy? Something we haven't covered that I haven't brought up yet.
Let's see. I think we covered like Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see the. I'm trying to think now. There was a lot of the stuff. I suppose it's it's such a big kind of pool of stuff to pick from.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, what was it? The I suppose. Well, we go with the droids. I suppose the.
Okay.
R2 and 3PO. R2 and 3PO. I mean, they seem to be. I mean, I've heard it said that Star Wars is their story more than Anakin because it's the universe from almost told through their point of view because they seem to be at all these events.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might have covered some of this last week, but oh God, how much it did seem that why wouldn't Obi-Wan have known? But then again, there's so many droids.
Yes.
And why wouldn't Darth Vader have recognized 3PO as he was the one who built him? But I suppose we covered that Anakin was to him dead, and maybe what Anakin created wouldn't have been either. Or am I or would I be wrong?
Actually, I am kind of glad you brought that up. There was a series of Dark Horse did called Star Wars Tales. And it's like little stories that take place within the Star Wars universe. Sometimes they focus on the main characters, sometimes they focus on side characters or whatever. There's one in particular that I remember very well. And it actually takes place in the time frame of Empire Strikes Back. If you remember, 3PO got blasted by a stormtrooper there on Cloud City.
Yes.
It's after Chewbacca and all of them have been captured. An Imperial officer or a stormtrooper or somebody brings the crate with the parts of 3PO into a room where Vader is at and says, "My lord, we found these with the rebels' possessions." And as Vader is examining the pieces of 3PO, we get a series of flashbacks to when Anakin was building 3PO. Now here's the interesting thing. And some people say this might have even been a little bit of a turning point for Vader or for Anakin and everything during the original trilogy timeline. So what ends up happening after he's done examining all the parts, an officer asks him, "Do you want to just smelt this?" And Vader says, "No. Give it to the Wookiee. Perhaps he can repair it."
Actually, you just answered a question there that would 3PO have been a turning point? As you mentioned, was the Dark Horse, was that canon or was it soft canon?
It was considered EU canon. It wasn't tied directly into EU canon and like cinematic canon are two different animals and everything. Some people you can include EU canon in with this cinematic canon, or you can keep it separate. For myself, I kind of include it because it's just one long thread. It's just a continuation. So, but yeah. Now, as far as I think I mentioned this, I'm actually an error, and I'm glad you asked this question. Obi-Wan does have some interaction with 3PO, but not much. I think the only time that he has interaction with him is when 3PO has his gold plating is at the end of Revenge of the Sith, because if you remember, after the fight with Anakin, Obi-Wan loads Padme's body onto her ship, and R2 and 3PO are there, and I think 3PO is actually piloting the ship and everything. But the thing you have to realize is there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of gold-plated protocol droids, and a person's memory is going to fade. It could happen. Or the simple fact that Obi-Wan could have been playing dumb and not let on that he knew who 3PO and R2 were. But if you remember me telling you, if you don't, that's fine. In one of the novelizations and everything, it's a more recent one that they did, when they're on their way to Alderaan, Obi-Wan does go over to R2 there in the bay, and he kneels down and pats him on the head and says, "Hello, my little friend. Good to see you." So that kind of explains everything, because as much as R2 was with Obi-Wan and Anakin, even though R2 was Anakin's droid, he would remember a call sign, and he would probably remember, maybe not the design of R2, but he would remember his call sign, R2D2. And that might have sparked, like, oh. And just when nobody was looking, he goes over and he's just like, "Hello there, little old friend. How are you?"
It would make sense too.
Jens, that's a good one.
Could be true.
Mhm.
Because I do remember that there were a lot of other protocol droids in the movies, so that's understandable that you wouldn't recognize C-3PO. As I understand, C-3PO, he had his memory wiped a few times, so he wouldn't recognize. Or was I wrong?
He just had his memory wiped the one time. That was it.
Okay.
Yeah. When Bail Organa tells Captain Antilles there on the Tantu 4 towards the end of Revenge of the Sith, to have the protocol droid's mind wiped, as far as I know, that's the only time that 3PO would have his mind wiped. To the best of my knowledge, now the thing you have to realize is, unless you're around protocol droids a whole lot, you don't necessarily understand what they're going to say. So, and it's always been, there's kind of a unspoken understanding that R2 has a little more discretion, a little more impulse control than 3PO does, and he would know not to blab to everybody and their mother, "Oh, hey, Luke, I used to belong to your dad, and we did all this stuff, and oh, wait a minute, and oh, yeah, and your dad's Darth Vader." So R2, it's always been understood that R2 has a little more discretion than 3PO does, so that's probably why that line and everything was thrown in there at the end of Revenge of the Sith, to explain, well, how come 3PO didn't tell Luke all this stuff? Oh, yeah, he had his mind wiped, so he wouldn't remember. So.
And it would make sense, because after that point, he wouldn't have met Obi-Wan again. He wouldn't have met anyone. So, yeah, that clears things up.
Yeah.
And makes sense.
Yeah. That was actually one time where Lucas got it right. he made the right call. He had the right piece of dialogue. He had the right scene. So.
And one thing, honestly, even as a normie fan, I won't criticize Lucas. I mean, I went to art college. But I learned once you finish a painting, you stay away from it, because one wrong brushstroke, you ruin the whole thing.
That is true.
Now, I don't criticize Lucas from trying to touch up an old work. Yeah. Like, in some cases, it made sense. In other cases, yeah, it might have detracted from, like, painting sunglasses on the Mona Lisa in some cases. But I don't criticize him for wanting to make it better, because he wasn't trying to wreck what others had seen. He wanted to share the joy he had, share his vision, and what he thought was better. Whether we agreed with him or not, he at least attempted to give something more. And you can't criticize him for that.
That is true. Well, the thing you have to remember about the special editions and everything, this was Lucas going back and fulfilling his vision because of technological limitations that were there at the time. Yeah, they could have done Jabba the Hutt as a giant puppet. It would have looked like crap. The different special effects shots and everything, having Cloud City look more expansive. They didn't have the means at the time, and so on. So from that aspect, when I went to see the special editions, I was like, okay, I see what he's doing. It's the same story. I'm on board. He's going back and putting in the stuff he couldn't put in back in 77 and 80 and 83. So,
and to be fair, it kind of raises the point. It's a slight segue, but while I'm not a fan of Star Trek Discovery, I remember having in chat once saying that I don't criticize what and some of the stuff they've done for changing the technology, because they had the technology we have today to create back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what Star Trek in the 60s would have looked more like the Discovery today. So I actually don't criticize changing the look of something to make it look more, to give it more modern, to do more with what we can now.
Yeah.
So I won't criticize the work, even if it changes how a film or the visuals look, like giving Cloud City a greater size, making it look bigger. I'm all for that.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the story doesn't change, as long as the story is good, I'm okay with making it more up to date with what we can do.
Yeah, I would agree with that myself. So, okay. Any other original trilogy questions you want to ask me?
I think I'm pretty good. We've covered quite a bit, and I'm kind of trying to search my head. Was there anything else? And honestly, at the moment, I can't think of anything. You've covered quite a bit and helped the Padawan increase a little.
I would say I'm going to cut off your Padawan's knot. I dubbed the Knight of Elysium. Knight of Jedi
excellent.
Order. So, okay. Well, that just that leaves one final question. Do you want to try and go over the sequel trilogy next week, or would you like to talk about the EU? And we can, of course, discuss it offline if you want. So,
either or would be good, because the sequel trilogy is probably one of the ones where a normie and someone who knows the lore would be able to have a really good discussion.
Okay.
Because I can tell you, like, I enjoyed the spectacle. There was some really, oh my God, what, I had to switch off the brain to watch it. But it would be a good way for you to say what needed to change for it to work for you. And I could say, how would that have affected my viewing as a normie?
Yeah, well, you're seeing, as I've sent it to you, you're seeing my vision for how The Rise of Skywalker would turn out if it was in my hands. But there's still a lot of road to look.
And I'm enjoying it.
Good. So, okay, well, folks, I think we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank Knight of Elysium. He's no longer a Padawan. I cut that little knot off the side of his head, that little ponytail, and he is a knight. So, and to everybody that's in the chat or has been in the chat, Jens Pender, MB Geek, Jeffrey Turner, aka Mega Jetty 1, Positive Candor, Sir Nerdalot, and oh, for heaven's sakes, who else was in here? I know that Pixelated was in here for a little bit, and Mr. Hyde, Mr. CCDV, Mr. Hyde, and to anybody else I might have missed, thank you all. The True 31, Jeff B, all of you that were in here, all of you that will catch us on the replay, I hope you enjoyed this discussion between me and Elysium. And we will be back next week and everything, and we'll do another installment of Star Wars Lore Talk. So we'll once we figure out the time and everything, I'll tweet that out and all that. Just a quick heads up on a few things for those of you that might have missed my channel update. Tomorrow, I've got a double header for you in the afternoon at 3:30 Central Time. Me and Elysium and Fiona Wolf and Classic Comics will be continuing our review of Babylon 5 Season 2, and this episode, The Long Dark. And then tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Central Time, I'll be having my ambassadorial birthday party watch party, and we'll be watching the great 80s classic Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I know there have already been several people that have said, hey, we want in, but to anybody that's in the chat or who'll see this, if you are interested in being a part of that panel, just get a hold of me on Discord or on Instagram or on Twitter and let me know. So, and then of course it's Wednesday, this Friday afternoon, I'll be back with another installment of my Star Wars fan fiction, Ray Who. I haven't decided on a time. It'll either be 12 or 12:30 and everything, and I'll also be on Central Time. So, Elysium, is there anything you want to plug for your channel before we sign off?
Yeah, I actually finished the was it Best Crew in Sci-Fi? That video was. I was due to release it earlier, but when I re-listened to it, I found two major bloopers, but one really big one. I was recording it late at night, and I mentioned as one of the Star Trek characters is coming from Stargate Next Generation, and I was going, that just doesn't sound right. I should have been Star Trek, and I was going, oh boy. I was saying I'd have had to turn in my nerd card right there and then had I released that. But I'll be releasing it later on, hopefully, and grab your pitchforks, get ready for the results.
Excellent. And very quickly to the chat, final remarks. Star Wars Santa, good afternoon, my friend. Good to see you. Sorry you missed this. I hope you enjoy the replay and everything, and I will tweet out the link for the replay here shortly. So anyways, folks, that's all we've got for you this afternoon. I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, one final thing. I am currently doing a review of Raised by Wolves with Dawson from Nerdy in Many Ways. He'll be releasing that, and once he does, I'll send out the link for that as well and everything. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that. So until next time, folks, you have a great afternoon and a great evening. And until next time, this is the Ambassadors signing off.